Good morning, friends. It's Saturday, and I'm back with Chapter 30 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Improvise and Adapt. Staring out of the classroom window at the trees beyond the playground, I saw the leaves were beginning to turn in earnest now. It would not be long before the trees were stripped of their foliage, and what little undergrowth there was would also be reduced to brown framework. I expected I would even be able to see the road beyond the trees before too long. Laughter at the back of the classroom reminded me that Wayne and the others were there. Since the tetherball incident, I always had to be aware of my surroundings, as I never knew when Wayne might decide to come after me. He would wait until he thought I was not paying attention and try to sneak up on me, as he learned quickly that chasing me was an exercise in futility. Kenny and I still had our occasional playground conversations and the time in art class, but he did not try to intercede with Wayne anymore. I could understand his position, since he lived so close to Wayne and had to ride the bus with him. I could not really call him a friend, but he was also not an enemy. That seemed to be the way it always was with us. Looking back at the trees, I wondered where they would go at lunch once the cover of the leaves was gone. Surely they would be very noticeable standing out in the trees smoking. There were a couple of evergreen trees in the small stand of woods, but they were hardly big enough to hide 5 boys. I thought about Fort Stix and how it was beginning to become very visible with the falling of the leaves. Since the weather cooled down, I was spending less time there. I still continued to work on it occasionally and had made great progress. The inside walls were now painted tan, and there were a few shelves and hooks here and there. Instead of a bucket, I now had several milk crates for us to sit on, and the bucket was used to pull things up into the fort from the front porch. I had hoped to make some friends at school and increase the membership of my fort, but it seemed no one actually lived close to me. It was like our farm was in the grandparents' zone. The end of the day bell rang and I gathered up my stuff to go. It seemed I must have been daydreaming hard because I normally had my book bag ready to go and was waiting on the bell. By the time I got up to leave, pretty much everyone else was gone. I headed for the bus, still thinking about my fort and lack of membership. As I rounded the corner by the office to the front doors, I saw Wayne and the others gathered just outside the doors by the flagpole. The principal was nowhere to be seen. Usually, he was standing out there watching to make sure everyone got to their buses. Not today. I weighed all of my options. Since my bus pulled out ahead of Wayne's, it allowed him a few moments to delay me while still being able to catch his bus. If I circled back around the back doors, I could probably get to the bus before he saw me, but there were no guarantees. I could just stroll out the doors and head to the bus in the hopes the principal was actually out there and just off to the side out of sight. I guess I came out of class later than I thought. As I started to muster the courage to just head out to the bus, I watched the tail end of the bus move out of sight of the doorway. I had missed the bus. Dejected, I watched as Wayne and his friends ran to catch their bus. I walked out of the school, watching as the last bus pulled away from the school. Now I would have to walk home. Not that it was that far. I just disliked the fact that it was not by choice. I could see Wayne and the others messing around in the last seat of the bus as it left the parking lot. They did not even notice me. I turned towards the woods and headed home. As I crossed the last woodlot before entering my woods, I came across something I had not noticed on previous passings. There was a wooden cable spool sitting off in the weeds to the side of the path. It was about 20 inches high and 3 foot in diameter. It was the perfect size to be a table in Fort Stix. It was a round table. I lifted it on edge to roll it out of the woods, being careful to watch for snakes. As I stood it up, I saw a copperhead snake curled up in the grass there. Backing off a few steps, I waited for the snake to wake up and realize his hiding place left without him. When he did, he looked around cautiously and then slithered off away from me. Looking at the hole in the center of the spool, I wondered if there might be something inside the center. Grabbing a stick, I poked it in and moved it around slowly. I felt nothing else and saw nothing react to the stick. Happy with my find, I rolled it out of the woods and after checking traffic, rolled across to my woods. Reaching the field near Fort Stix, I rolled the spool to the area under the front porch and left it for later. As I was approaching the driveway, Mark came walking up the driveway. "How come you were not on the bus?" he asked. "I was doing some work in my class and missed the bus," I said. He did not need to know about Wayne. "I found a new table for the fort. I need you to help me get it in there later." "Okay," he said and walked up to the back porch. As I was walking in the door, I heard Dad call from by the garage. "As soon as you change clothes, come out to the garage and bring a couple of big plastic bowls." He opened a beer. "We got to butcher them turkeys today." "Okay," I said and went into the kitchen. Mom was at the sink doing something and did not even look up. "Make sure and change out of your school clothes before you go back outside." "Okay, Mom," I said and headed for my room. I changed into a pair of play pants. I was going to put on my favorite jeans with the patches on the knees, but since we were going to be killing turkeys, there was a chance I would get blood on me, and I did not want that on my favorite jeans. No telling when Mom would do laundry. I grabbed the bowls and went to the garage. Mark was there talking with Dad already. He seemed to find it unbelievable that we would make food from live turkeys. "Hey, Kevin," Dad said, "go ahead and bring one of them turkeys into the garage." I went out to the chicken coop to get a turkey. It seemed they knew something was happening as they all congregated in a corner away from me. I went back into the garage and got food for all the birds. I figured if they were busy eating, they would not notice my coming in to get one of them. The ducks were happy to see me as usual, and I took a minute to pet them and watch them play. The chickens and turkeys were now scattered around the coop, scratching up the corn I threw in for them. I grabbed a short piece of soft rope and made a loop at the end. Slipping into the pen, I slipped it over the neck of the nearest turkey and let him out of the pen. He resisted at first, but to my surprise, he walked out and right into the garage with me. Mark was waiting for me and closed the door when I got the bird inside. I led it over to the stump and stood back to wait for Dad to kill it. Mark had never seen us kill a bird before, and when Dad removed its head, the body started to try to fly away. It got away from Dad and flew towards Mark, its stump of a neck pointing right at him. He screamed and scrambled out the door. The look on his face was wild, and I busted out laughing. We processed 5 of our 6 turkeys, and once they were ready for dipping and plucking, Dad had me go get Mark to help pluck the birds. Carrying a bowl of hearts, livers, and gizzards into the house, I set them on the table for Mom. Mark did not want to come back out, but finally relented when I told him Dad said he had to. Once the birds were finished and wrapped in butcher paper, Dad put 4 of them in the freezer and told me to come on as he walked out the back door with one in hand. We climbed in the truck and rolled down the driveway, straight across the road and into Uncle Al's driveway. Uncle Al was actually Dad's godfather and his friend Dennis' father. He was part of the family, though not by blood, and was as old as Grandpa. Aunt Dolly was pleased to receive the turkey for Thanksgiving and stuck it right into the freezer while Al grabbed a bottle of scotch and led Dad out by his garden. He had a big pile of potatoes on the table and told me to sack up some to take to Mom. I put the potatoes in the truck and sat listening as they drank scotch and talked. As usual, the conversation turned to old times and family and the war. I half listened as I looked around at Uncle Al's garden. His pitchfork was sticking in the ground around a bunch of dying vines, and I could see he'd been digging the potatoes earlier in the day. I got up to examine a wooden box he had sitting beside the garden. "You like that box trap?" Uncle Al asked. "I keep that there to catch rabbits that like to raid my garden." "What do you do with the rabbits?" I asked. "Eat 'em," he said, smiling. "Nothing like a fresh rabbit cooked up with fresh taters and carrots." I smiled because I agreed. I liked fresh rabbit too, but only got it when Dad and I went hunting and shot them. I had never thought about catching them live in traps before. Now I knew what I was going to do with some of the leftover wood from building Fort Stix. I examined the trap carefully to see how it was built. Uncle Al was getting a bit into his cups, and he told Dad that he knew something important about the past, but it was too soon to tell him. He promised to tell him before he died. Dad tried to get him to tell him now that he brought it up, but the old man refused. He said it was about his father. The air got colder as the front rolled in, and everyone decided it was time to call it a night. I realized I had not even had dinner yet, and it had been dark for quite a while now. I got in the truck for the ride home and rolled up the window. It was starting to snow a little now. Standing near the garage the next afternoon after school, I surveyed my lumber. There was plenty here to build box traps with, and I selected a few pieces to take into the garage. The wood was a little damp from the snow the night before, but it had pretty much dried out when the sun came up and melted it all off. The snow blew over quickly during the night, and we had clear skies all day. I was in the garage fitting pieces of wood together as I designed my first box trap when I heard Dad's truck pull up outside. Before I could even go to the door to say hello, he was rushing into the garage with a paper sack in hand. He took it to the bench and dumped it out before going to the corner to grab his heaviest fishing pole. A dozen giant treble hooks with lead molded to them gleamed under the shop light. These were snagging hooks. "What are you doing, Dad?" I asked, watching him test the line on his reel to see if it was strong. "The Chinook are running in Burns Harbor," he said excitedly. "Go grab your strongest rod and come on." I ran into the house and grabbed my stiffest rod and took it out back to the garage. Dad tested my line, and after deciding it was strong enough for now, tied a snagging hook on for me. He had tied one to his rod while I was in the house. When he was done, he took the rods out to put them in the truck. "Get the big net and put it in the truck," he said as he headed for the back porch. "I'll be out in a minute. We gotta go." I put the big net in the truck, remembering the last time I used it when Mark lost his fish. I hoped nothing like that would happen again, and hopped in the truck. Dad came out a few minutes later and quickly headed the truck towards Burns Harbor in his secret spot. The sun was almost fully down when Dad parked the truck at the far edge of the parking lot in Burns Harbor. We were going to fish Burns Ditch, not too far from the outlet to Lake Michigan. Each fall, Chinook salmon returned to the Burns Ditch to spawn. After they spawned, they would die. They actually started coming into the area in July and August, but those were early stragglers. After the first frost, they came in large numbers, which increased the odds of catching them. Now, snagging was illegal at the time in Indiana, and Dad knew that, but the allure of fresh Chinook salmon was strong. There was nothing like hooking into one of the monstrous beasts, and who did not like fresh smoked salmon? I wondered why we did not just go to Michigan where snagging salmon was legal, but was happy to fish wherever I was. The area of Burns Ditch we would fish was well maintained and protected against erosion, as it was the main channel for sport fishing boats to get out on Lake Michigan. As such, both sides of the channel were covered in rocks called riprap, all the way up the banks and 15 or so feet away from the channel. For bait fishing, it was a world of snags, But for snagging, it was perfect, as long as you did not let your hook sink too deep. Grabbing our rods and the net, we walked carefully down the rocks to the water's edge. I moved a good way away from Dad and cast at the same time he did. Counting 3, I reeled up the slack and hauled back, ripping my hook through the water. Suddenly, the hook stopped as if I had snagged on a rock, and I felt my heart sink a bit, as I thought I had lost a snagging hook on my first cast. Keeping the line taut, I reeled quickly as I moved the rod closer to the water to try and free it, when suddenly it lurched hard away from me. I had not snagged a rock on my first cast. I had snagged a fish. The fight was on, and I hollered for my dad to get the net and come help. I fought the fish as it ran first up the channel and the line peeled from the reel, and then back toward me as I reeled furiously to keep it tight. Dad stood on the rocks near me, smoking a cigarette and holding onto the net. He coached me as I fought the fish, and after what seemed an eternity, it tired and allowed me to swim him to the net. I was excited, as this was going to be my first snagged salmon ever. I watched as he scooped the fish up, impressed that it laid across the entire bottom of the net with its tail sticking out. Then I realized it was a buffalo carp. The fish was huge, especially for an 11-year-old boy, but it was a carp. Dad estimated it weighed about 20 pounds as he took the hook out and stood back to look at it. I was disappointed, and at first wanted to throw it back. Then Dad pointed out that Mom and Grandma loved carp because it was the fish they used to get in Germany. He had me put it on ice in the truck. We fished until Dad was worn out without catching anything else and headed to the house. I got the fish wrapped in plastic and tucked into the bottom of the refrigerator for the night with the intention of cleaning it after school the next day. Mom woke up as we were getting a bite to eat and asked about the fish. Dad told her what I caught, and she seemed pleased at first, until she asked if he had bled it good while it was still alive. When he said we had not, she said we may as well throw it away, because the meat would be ruined by now. As I was going to bed, Dad said to just bury it out in the field after school. Sitting in class the next morning, I kept thinking about the fish. It seemed a shame to just kill it and bury it. I had wanted to throw it back. It was bugging me all morning until that afternoon when I was walking into science class and noticed a picture of a dissected body on the wall. We were supposed to come up with projects for science class. I went to the teacher. "I have an interesting idea for a science project," I said, standing in front of the teacher's desk, grinning. "What did you have in mind, Kevin?" "How about if I dissect a large fish in class and lay out the parts with labels?" "Well, that's a new one," he grinned. "I've never had someone dissect anything in class before. That is actually college-level work." "Really?" I asked, surprised. To me, cleaning a fish was just preparing food and adding some labels to the guts. "Yes, really," he said. "But I like it. When would you like to do it?" "Well, I caught about a 20-pound buffalo carp last night and did not bleed it fast enough, so Mom does not want to eat it," I explained. "I'm supposed to bury it this afternoon to get it out of the fridge, but I think it would be okay one more night if it was for school." "So tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I can make my labels this evening and bring it to you in the morning when I get off the bus to keep in the fridge until class." "Well, that sounds reasonable." He smiled and got up. "It's time for class now, so take your seat, but I'll be waiting for you in the morning." I took my seat, feeling very happy. Now the fish would still end up wasted, but it would provide an opportunity for me to do well in school. The rest of the day flew by, and before I knew it, I was at home making labels for the parts of the fish I would be removing in class. Luckily, one of my outdoor magazines had a drawing of fish entrails, and the parts were labeled. This would be good. The next morning, I loaded the plastic-wrapped fish into a paper grocery bag with handles. By holding the handles behind my neck with both arms, I could carry the fish like a backpack. I got lots of curious stares from the other kids on the bus and in the halls of school, but I kept my secret. Only my class would get to see what I had. I dropped it off to my science teacher and asked him to take the fillet knife out of the bag before putting it in the fridge. That afternoon when I arrived at class, the fish was laid out on butcher paper and covered with my plastic on a table at the rear of the class. After roll call and a review of the previous day's lesson, the teacher announced I would be revealing my first class project. I moved to the back of the room and uncovered the fish. "Ooh," one of the girls said, causing several others to laugh aloud. I gave a quick explanation of what I would be doing and paused as the teacher called the class to gather around close. I noticed Wayne was hanging at the back of the crowd and thought it was because he was tall enough to see over everyone. When the knife made a squishing sound as I entered the vent and started to cut forward, I saw him wince and knew he was squeamish. After opening the belly, I cut upward to the center line and then along the bone at the midline to remove a flap from over the stomach area. Laying this aside, everyone could see the guts clearly. After carefully removing each organ and laying them out in a kind of exploded view on butcher paper, I applied the labels and moved on to remove the gills. For the finale, I split the top of the head, cut down at the front of the eye socket, and then back through the cheek to the gill plate. The section made a squishy sucking sound as I pulled it off and laid it aside. I removed the brain and optical nerve and laid them on the table by their labels, and then proceeded to remove the eyeball. The eyeball was not very cooperative. I was sure I had cut all the membranes loose around it, but it would not lift out gently. I placed the tip of the knife under it and tried to pry gently against the bone. The eyeball popped out suddenly and went flying across the room. One girl ducked and I watched as it whizzed by the next girl to impact right on Wayne's chest. For a big, tough, long-haired heathen, he sure did squeal when the eyeball hit him and plopped to the floor. He threw up his hands to fan it away and danced a few steps back. I tried to maintain a serious look while inside I was laughing. Kenny reached down and grabbed the eye and placed it neatly next to its label on the table, flashing me a grin. The bell rang to end class and the teacher told me to leave everything there as he wanted to take pictures of the project before cleaning up. He walked with me back to my homeroom and handed my fillet knife to the teacher, saying I would get it back after school. He also said I earned an A for my project. I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.